Welcome back to Watch the Booker Man and to another video that is looking at the transition from TNA to Impact Wrestling as we begin 2012 in our save. And basically this is the first take of the previous video that was put up on the channel. It ended up coming out far too long, but I mentioned during the last video that I'd done a little bit of a run through of the roster and gave my opinions on pretty much everybody in the company. A couple of people mentioned that they'd like to see that video, so I've cut out all the bits that basically overlap on things I already mentioned, but hopefully people will be interested to hear my insights on the roster and perhaps give their own opinions as to who maybe I'm overvaluing, who I'm undervaluing, and maybe even those that you agree with. There will also be a link in the description to this video to the January 2012 database, one version where the company is still named TNA, and one after I have changed the titles, the events, and the company's name to Impact Wrestling. So take your pick, and if you want to make your own history with this save, I'd be very interested to hear if anybody does play it, or has any other thoughts if they dig through the database. With that said, here is the initial roster of Impact Wrestling. And we currently have 74 active wrestlers on the roster, as well as quite a few non-wrestlers also contracted. And I'm going to kick off with the unimportant people, perhaps some who are just straight up jobbers, and others who are young wrestlers like Adam Cole here at the top, who can potentially be something in the future and who perhaps Evolve Wrestling can provide a platform to bring them up to a level where they can eventually become big parts of the Impact Wrestling brand. We've got Aja Konku. She's got a lot more over than she was, but just bringing somebody in who is an unknown in the United States, it's always going to be difficult to get them over. April Hunter has been booked as a jobber essentially. I did have ideas for her when she came in, but it's just one of those catch-22 situations. Sometimes the ratings aren't good because you don't book them so well, but because the ratings aren't good, you're not going to book them as well as some of the people who are out of the gate giving you the performances you want. Brody Lee is a relatively new addition to the roster and isn't well known. In 2012, I do think that we're going to see a huge rise in his popularity. I've got a specific role in mind for him that I think is going to work really, really well. Brooke has been a little bit of a lackey to the beautiful people recently and has lost the vast majority of her matches. Christy Hem, somebody who has only just come into storyline, having been the ring announcer for quite some time. Colt Cabana is essentially friend of El Generico at the moment. I'm a little bit surprised to see him in Unimportant. I thought he might be recognisable. He's got quite a bit of overness, as we can see, and he's very entertaining, that charisma at 87. So I thought that maybe, even though he's probably lost maybe 2/3 of his matches, I did think he might get a little bit more over. Daisy Hayes, somebody else who has a very poor record. I'm not going to go through everybody, but some of them are really... It's disappointing to see James Mitchell down here, and we know that he's so good, but actually I found that he's probably brought Abyss down. Abyss's segments when he wasn't talking and was using his overness and his menace were probably doing better than when we brought James Mitchell in. But on the other hand, I really like James Mitchell, and I do think he added a lot to that character. Jazz is similar to April Hunter. We had an initial strong storyline for her, I felt, when she was going after Tara, even picking up a victory over her, but she has just dropped into that role of somebody who can put over the more over knockouts. Kyle O'Reilly in a similar situation to Adam Cole, while Lindsay Kay is... She's very young, 24, but somebody who's kind of been forced on us. I did want to get rid of her after the initial 3-month run. She was only brought in for the showcase match against Awesome Kong, really, and just the novelty of having somebody who is larger than Awesome Kong going up against her. But Dixie decided to extend her, so we've made her part of the beautiful people, kind of. Again, she's not an important member of the roster, so that is a completely fair status, you have to say. Magnus, again, young, potential. In this version of TNA, there's just people who do everything better than him. That's not to say I don't see him becoming a good mid-card act, but in terms of where he ended up in TNA in reality as the world champion, I think that was partially a sign of where the company had gone as much as how good he was, and that's from somebody who was a big fan of Magnus and was really happy to see him win the world championship when he did in TNA. ODB, she was our first Knockouts champion when this save began, and slowly but surely she's been booked worse and worse. She's barely even used anymore. She's on a per appearance deal, and she's somebody who we just use every now and again. I've had a couple of chances to bring her back into storyline, times where we just needed a little challenger for somebody, but always I've had a different idea and gone in a different direction. So unfortunately it looks like ODB isn't going to be somebody who ever reaches that upper echelon again, but I do think that she's a popular wrestler, an interesting knockout, and somebody who, if we ever need to bring her back in, she will be there and will do a decent job. Rhett Titus, another one of these young guys. In reality, unlike Kyle O'Reilly and Adam Cole, he never perhaps hit the heights that they hit, but his age and his potential, I really do think that he can become an interesting member, maybe of the X Division, alongside his partner Kenny King. He is one of Kurt Angle's proteges in the company, so who knows, maybe just rubbing shoulders with him may give him the opportunity to become a bigger star than he actually did. Rosita, again, she's rubbing shoulders with LAX. She's been part of the D'Angelo De Niro return storyline, so somebody, again, a common theme I'd say in these unimportant people is how young they are. We've got so many wrestlers under 25 who, one of the big things that Paul Heyman said was, come back in 5 years, in 10 years and see where these people are. That's absolutely the case. Rosita, Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Rhett Titus, all so young and so full of potential that I think that we've only scratched the surface of what they can do. Scott D'Amore, Sean Spears, Tyson Duke's down there as well. Just a standard jobber stable, although the addition of Eric Young does give them an extra edge, and I think they're going to be another one of the mainstays on Evolve Wrestling. Eric Young, we know he can deliver. He was down as low as unimportant recently, so it's good to see him up and out of that group. Tracy Brooks, not used very often, kind of with the face turn of the forefathers. She's not really been used much with Kazarian, so kind of somebody who's just on the roster. Again, a paper appearance deal, so it doesn't really matter whether we use her or not. Velvet Sky's one who has always been in this unimportant role, and it's one that surprises me. She is the fall taker usually when it's Angelina Love and Velvet Sky, mostly because Angelina Love in this mod has a huge ego and hates losing, but it has meant that it's been difficult to build any momentum for Velvet Sky. Maybe a move away from Angelina Love, a face turn, a change of gimmick. That could be something in her future, although this is the first time that has crossed my mind because I really do like the beautiful people together as an act. We then go into the Recognisable, and I feel again there's quite a wide gap in terms of the popularity of some of these people or how I perceive them and how they're being seen in the game. So Alyssa Flash is somebody who I probably would expect to be on the well-known, or who I hope to see there. She's really very good in the ring and has been delivering whatever has been asked of her recently, promo-wise, as well as those in-ring skills, and I think she's somebody who, despite only being Recognisable, has developed well under the Paul Heyman regime. Amazing Red is somebody who's probably gone backwards. He was the guy who we build as the personification of the X Division. That kind of worked two ways, because in terms of the in-ring, the flips, the innovative style, that's absolutely the case, but when we were saying that, there was also the idea that we did want the X Division to be more than just guys who can do good stuff in the ring, and I think with champions like Kevin Steen, with Tyler Black, with El Generico who has it now, that's definitely something that will come into play more. I think even Kazuchika Okada having it with Sweeney as his manager, we've done a lot more with the X Division than I certainly did in the first few months. Kazarian's also held that belt. Amazing Red is still somebody who I love to throw out there. Another one who I feel will do really well on Evolve Wrestling. He's never going to be somebody whose promos deliver if you look at his microphone and acting skills, etc. But somebody who, if you can keep him around, he's always going to be a unique wrestler and somebody who can do good things on your roster. Consequences Creed is another one who probably haven't done that much with, but again, a popular member of the roster, somebody I really like, and kind of when you know what he went off to do in reality. He was in FCW in real life at this time. A few years later, he'd be in the New Day and one of the most popular acts in professional wrestling, so he may be getting itchy feet looking at what is available on the other side, but for the time being, he's a lower mid-card wrestler, but somebody, again, I'm happy to stick around, and it's kind of easy to manage morale in this game, so you're not going to have people walking out. Eric Young, another guy almost on the heel side of the Consequences Creed role. He's only just turned heel, but he started as a heel, turned face, gone back heel. Somebody who we've, above anybody else, I'd say, had a haphazard direction with, somebody I definitely could have done better with, and another one like Magnus, where you see he became a world heavyweight champion in TNA. In my mind, that's simply never going to happen. Who knows, but it seems unlikely. Frankie Kazarian, only down at Recognisable, is a little bit disappointing. A member of the Forefathers, somebody who, at the start of the save, the likes of him, Beer Money, Daniels, would be key parts as what you'd call TNA originals, but who also could take that step up. Again, it's not to say he's been booked particularly badly. I would actually be interested to see his overall record. I was looking for TNA there. In Impact Wrestling. He's got a 23 win, 26 loss record, and he's been in a 90 rated match against CM Punk. So I don't think that's somebody who's been booked badly, but that record is the definition of mid-card. Speaking of the records, we will be looking at following wrestlers' records throughout 2012, a reset of course with the rebrand, but it'll be good to keep an eye on who I am actually booking well and who maybe deserves better. Gail Kim, again, only recognisable, but I see her reaching star level, perhaps even beyond. We're yet to have a knockout at major star level, but she may be just the woman to do that. Her run in WWE has left her a little bit cold, so we have had to do more with her than I expected. I thought she'd come in and be one of the best members of the roster. We can see she has the ability, but it is going to take a little bit of time to get rid of that residue of the WWE run, and I really do like that in a sense that we've done such a good job with some of the knockouts that when she's come in and is wrestling at a fairly average level, you can see she needs to step up or she isn't going to make it in the main event. Hamada, another very strong member of the roster, who again hasn't had that focus that she could have had. In my mind, she's somebody who could have been the Knockouts champion, but then Sarah Del Rey came in, and then Kong and Tara and Mickey, we had the storyline with them, so it's somebody who, it just hasn't been the right time. She has held the Knockouts Tag Team Championships and is somebody who I do have ideas for, but we'll see where she goes in the future. I don't want to give anything away there. Hernandez is in a good tag team with Homicide, don't get me wrong, but are they going to reach that upper echelon? I'm not sure. I would say that there was a time when Homicide and Hernandez would, without question, hang with Beer Money, WGTT, Kings of Wrestling, American Wolves, so perhaps it's as much my booking as it is on them, but at the minute they are firmly on that level below. I'm not going to talk too much about the non-wrestlers, but Jimmy Jacobs, one of the first signings that we ever did, he made his debut on the second episode of Impact that we booked in this save, and I think he's done absolutely fantastically. He came in without much popularity, without much fanfare really. He was just managing Kong and Hamada, and then it evolved into him taking the New Age to Alyssa Flash and Mischief. We then added Tyler Black and the Kings of Wrestling, Sarah Del Rey, and the rest is history. He spoke very, very early on about that wave, that first flap of the butterfly's wing that would change everything. And I think it's fair to say, especially when we look to some of the stars and major stars on this roster, Jimmy Jacobs' impact cannot be understated, and he tends to do a good job of whatever is asked of him. The leader of the New Age, of course, currently known as the New Age of Honor, and again, somebody who I see playing very, very strongly into the future storylines we have involving those people. Kenny King, I spoke about briefly earlier, the guy who I would say has more upside out of ANX, and the guy who went on to do more, I suppose, as a singles wrestler. Certainly in TNA he moved on and became an X Division champion, and that's basically where I see him, a member of the X Division, and that's why he kind of distanced himself from the New Age of Honor. ANX were basically a jobber team. When Future Shock came in and sort of took that role from him, we wanted him to distance himself from that, and hopefully with the face turn that you can see is prepared, I'm not going to sort of pretend that's going to be a big shock when it comes, but a guy who I think can build himself up and evolve, just gives him the chance to cut a few promos, have a few longer matches, and we'll see whether he can make this step up. Larry Sweeney is another one who, somebody I'm so glad to have had on this roster, and who his stable hasn't necessarily been heavily featured, but again, he's entertaining. Look at his skill there, the 83 charisma, very strong in the other two entertainment categories. What he did with Okada I thought was really good. He was the one who brought interest back to the X Division when Okada was the X Division champion and Larry Sweeney was kind of doing his stuff in the background, pulling the strings. I really think that was, if you look at where the X Division was going in the first few months of the save, and then when that happened, we really saw a change in the fortunes of the division. Strong, Black, a number of great champions, and he was the catalyst for that. So another fantastic addition that we brought in, and I think when you look through this, you'll see just how much the roster has changed from 2 years ago. A huge percentage of this roster wasn't here. Maria Kanellis being another one, came in as the girlfriend, love interest of Jay Lethal, and slowly was the one who corrupted him into becoming the heel Evolve champion that we see, and of course he sees that as his show, so another one who is going to be a part of that roster. Mark Briscoe along with Jay Briscoe, I don't know, it's just not clicked for me. That's on me, I do accept that I've not integrated them well enough, but they kind of were the ROH guys who weren't on board with the New Age of Honor, so there were faces who were against the New Age of Honor but weren't TNA representatives, so they kind of just felt separate to everything, but I didn't feel like they would come in and align with CM Punk and the way that the rest of the New Age of Honor were doing it, because that didn't align with their characters to me. So it was a little bit difficult, and that's why we've seen them on the edges. But they've got a huge match on the first episode of Impact Wrestling, and I think as well as that, they can be some guys who do well on the second show as well. Matt Jackson and Nick Jackson we spoke about briefly with the Larry Sweeney stuff, but it's the age of them. They're so young and there's so long for them to become even better. I would like to have capitalised a bit more on the strong Bound for Glory tag team series they had, but I'm not too upset. I do think that there's a lot of potential and everybody knows how good they became. We want to see that, albeit in a slightly different path. Mischief is somebody who I brought in quite early on, and she's quite consistently had stuff to do. She's kind of in an odd couple pairing with Daisy Hayes at the minute, and they're two women who I do have plans for going into 2012. The last two remaining female members of the New Age of Honor, and as they move away from that, I do think that they can do some interesting stuff in the Knockouts tag team division. That's a division that we really have to strengthen going forward, and I do think we'll do that. Rocky Romero isn't really on the roster. He came in for a one-off match with, was it El Generico? Yeah, towards the end of 2011, and he's been on a couple of shows. As well as that, he was in the Destination X match for a contract, which led to Austin Aries' big breakout storyline, and he was also on Glory by Honor. But somebody who, again, he's getting the chance on Evolve. He's not a full member of the roster, I wouldn't say. He was on the Ring of Honor roster. We've brought him up, and we'll see what he can do in ROH. Nikki Rocks has been pushed just as a jobber, so it's a credit to her that she's still considered recognisable. Likewise for Daphne, really. We've not given them much of a spotlight other than a couple of tag team title shots, but they're people who I think, again, we could have done more with, but I've always had priorities elsewhere in the division. Sarita is another one of those mid-card knockouts wrestlers who I do think, I know I'm saying this for a lot of people, but actually looking at her abilities, 80 psychology, incredible high flying, and some really good technical ability as well. So I did have plans to push her, and she's in that storyline with Hamada that I think is going to elevate both of them and Taylor Wilde. But seeing those ratings also, she definitely has to become a huge part of this Knockouts roster, and we know that from the performances she's been putting in, she certainly has shown us that. Taylor Wilde, by comparison, doesn't look as good in the ring, but she always had the likability, and people always seem to connect with her, so she's somebody else who, as part of this storyline, I do think will come out of it as a bigger star. Steve Corino, again, somebody we brought in last year. He had that big promo on Paul Heyman, and he's been the sort of glue holding together the New Age of Honor. The fractions that we've started to see in that group, we'll see again him become a big part of storyline in 2012. Sonjay Dutt, file with Consequences Creed, I suppose, somebody who I brought in with a bit of fanfare. He got quite a good push at the start, and he was going after the X Division Championship. Obviously, the storyline that's always there in the back pocket with him is the fact that he's never held that title before, but whether we'll get to see him fulfill that potential, who knows. The way the X Division is going, it may be difficult for him to reach the top level. The well-known people that we have, Abyss, who just doesn't fit for me at the moment. I don't know where he comes back into storyline. His last storyline was De Niro. The year before he had Jay Lethal, and he's sort of dotted between stuff. James Mitchell, the provocateur, Abyss doing the bludgeoning, I suppose. He's a really talented wrestler, but I have in my mind how he sort of declined in reality around this time. This was where he became Joseph Park, I think 2012 or 2013, and physically he changed. He wasn't as intimidating or as imposing, and I just don't know where he fits at the minute. He's a bit of an outcast on this roster. I don't know any more than that. Alex Shelley's not happy at the minute, but somebody who, with his partner Chris Sabin, has been booked exceptionally well, I think. At times has been booked exceptionally well. Two-time tag team champions, are champions at the beginning, and they did so well. The Bound for Glory series, I thought, really was a good launching pad for them. So that makes me question why I then took Alex Shelley off screen with a kayfabe injury. Yeah, maybe a questionable decision there when I think back to it after all that momentum they'd built up, but after losing to the American Wolves, because I have somebody else in mind as the next champions, they just kind of had nowhere else to go. If you're a tag team and you're not going after the tag team titles, what can you really do? Christopher Daniels, the man who got the pinfall in the final match in TNA history, or the final match in Impact history, he's one of them guys. I mean, it says his gimmick's adequate. That's what I feel he is. I was always a big fan of Christopher Daniels. There's just other people on this roster, whether they're younger, whether they're a little bit more entertaining, whether they just a little bit more interesting to me, unfortunately, and that's the case for Christopher Daniels, that he's good, he's always going to be at that upper mid-card level, but back in the main event scene, unlikely from my perspective. D'Angelo Dinero is somebody who's recently come back after that awful injury. That's why we've given him a 2-year deal, and we want to see what he's capable of. A man who I'm very, very keen to build up. He came back to a lot of fanfare. That feud with Abyss, I'd probably say he's cooled down a little bit, but what we've got for him next, I think will heat him right back up. Eddie Edwards, well known, while you'll see Davey Richards is a little bit higher up than him, one half of the Impact World Tag Team Champions, billed and booked as the best tag team in the world. There is no debate in that. They'll face the Briscoes, of course, on the first Impact Wrestling show ever. The X Division champion El Generico, he's really, I think, had his establishing moment over the last few months. He came in, I think it was January or maybe a little bit later in 2011, and was kind of a lower card, fun-loving character. He then arrived, I'd say, with that feud against Tyler Black, where he eventually became the X Division champion, then to lose it 24 hours later to Kevin Steen. At Final Resolution, he won it back, and now he's one of my favourite wrestlers of all time. His in-ring ability around this time was absolutely incredible, and we're just going to get to show that off in the X Division. That's what the X Division's all about. I know I've said it about Amazing Red earlier, but El Generico is the wrestler that we want to see. He's entertaining, he's got charisma, he puts so much across even though he's under that mask, and I think that he is going to be a great fan favourite champion to take the division forward. Homicide I spoke about earlier with Hernandez. James Storm, the Forefathers, we've kind of mentioned. Two guys I think I could do more with at the moment. They've sort of got lost in the shuffle of this TNA versus Ring of Honor storyline, which I think that's been the case for quite a lot of people. As good as it was, and as much as I enjoyed booking that overarching storyline, a little bit of the nuance gets lost. They were just fighting Ring of Honor guys, and there's only so long you can do that. So now, with the line drawn under that, as happened at Final Resolution, the final battle, we're going to again see more from them. Jay Briscoe we spoke about earlier, as we did Jay Lethal, and we've touched on Kevin Steen. Well known, he was previously a star, so I'm a little bit upset to see him down there, but in building El Generico up, Kevin Steen taking that loss at the pay-per-view, that was going to happen. Madison Rayne up at well known is good to see. A former Knockouts champion, and somebody who you could say doesn't really fit. If you look at the lineage we had, the title went from ODB, then we put it on Tara, then Madison Rayne, then Awesome Kong, Sarah Del Rey, Mickie James, back on Tara, and you would probably say that Madison Rayne is the outlier there. That was a transitional reign that we gave her, but one that I specifically put in there as somebody who wouldn't hurt too much to only have a short reign, but also somebody who back then at 23 or 24, whatever it was, it showed the faith we had in her to be a future top star, and she's still so young, 25, plenty of potential, so much more to come from her, and she's always very, very entertaining when we send her out there on the microphone and plays her role very, very well. I remember her being an integral part of the Knockouts division in reality around this time. Mickie James is basically been booked very, very strongly for just over a year. She's maybe gone into a little bit of a lull after losing the title, and is about finding that next direction for her now. She's going after Christy Hem, which is a bit of a dead end because Christy Hem can't actually get in the ring and wrestle. She's lost the rivalry with Tara. Those two have been sort of joined at the hip for the last year and a bit, you'd say. Previously as a tag team, then as rivals, two women who I think come out better than they started from this rivalry. It's not always the case that when you have a big rivalry, two people come out of it better than they started, but Tara is the Impact Knockouts champion, and Mickie a former Knockouts champion and a very strongly established member of the roster. We look at another strong member of the roster, and he's only 31, but he almost feels like a veteran in this company, and that's kind of how he's been booked. Maybe not fairly. He came into the company at 29 or 30 and immediately played the sort of bitter veteran gimmick. There is a sort of tongue-in-cheek nature to that, the idea that he's saying been around the block and he's taught all these other wrestlers everything they know. He's been in WWE, he's been around the world, he's made money from professional wrestling, and he's got a thing or two to teach these young punks. But when you look at somebody like Roderick Strong, who you'd say is at the complete other end of his career, he's somebody who's just an upstart, somebody who you're just ready to see where he can possibly go. There's only 3 years between them, and Strong isn't that much younger now than London was when he started, but it's sometimes a perception you can get with wrestlers where wrestlers who've been around for ages can seem like young up and comers, and on the other hand, some people who are only young, you think that they're these veterans who've been around forever. It just depends on when those wrestlers get their breaks. Sara Del Rey, probably my favourite member of the Knockouts division. She was a fantastic champion. That's why we gave her the longest reign in company history, and she's so talented and so good that she can be away from that title scene and still be one of the strongest members of the roster. She's just turned face, so much potential with rivalries from her, and we're going to see a lot from Sara Del Rey going forward. I really am a huge fan of where we've come with the Knockouts division. Not that it was bad at the start of the save, but we've got so many talented wrestlers on there and so much to come from them. Austin Aries makes his way to a star, perhaps because of his crusade against TNA. He's almost been a little bit of a mini CM Punk, although I don't think he'd thank me for saying that. He's really talented, he's getting over, and he's just gone through Sting, Jeff Hardy, Kurt Angle, so he's gone through some big names and got the better of them, so it's no surprise that he sees himself up there in the star ranking. Awesome Kong, another one who, she just is a star. There's no other way of saying it. You look at her, you see what she does in the ring. She is unique. She is a attraction, and there's no doubting that she deserves to be in that star position. One half of the Knockouts Tag Team Champions. It's quite interesting that her partner is completely on the opposite end of the spectrum. She's considered unimportant. Knowing that Kong's in the ring with her means that we don't have to worry too much about that. Davey Richards, like I said with Eddie, best tag team in the world. He is a star, slightly more over than his partner, and I have mentioned previously perhaps testing the waters with him after the tag team title reign is over as a potential singles wrestler, just to see how he hangs. I am quite surprised to see Loki and Robert Roode up in the star category, but it shows that even maybe without the best booking, they're guys who have connected with the audience and who I need to do more with. I see Loki at the very top of that Evolve Wrestling roster. We saw him put out an incredible match with Amazing Red, both of them of course part of that, but Key was the one who carried that match. Robert Roode, again, you look at where he was in reality, he was the TNA World Heavyweight Champion at this time. The way things have gone and the fact our roster is very different to TNA's at that time in reality means that he's not quite on that level, and I think it's justified that we're not seeing him in World Heavyweight title matches yet, and his legs with bare money left, a future star without question, and that's a prime example. You look at him as a future star, he's 3 years older than Paul London. Samoa Joe, the right hand man to CM Punk, but that's not to downplay what he's done. His overness isn't what I expected, to be fair. He's protected and he very rarely loses cleanly, but at the same time, because he's that sort of last step before Punk, he's somebody who people might go through to get to Punk, and therefore he loses on the way to the person coming after the top guy. Shelton Benjamin, I know there's a couple of tag teams, the American Wolves being prime examples right there. It does feel every time there's a WGTT match, I can't help but notice that Benjamin's the one carrying the match, and quite often Haas is the one as the weak link. That's the most stark gulf I think we've got in a tag team. There's some others where there's a few points different and you can kind of let it go. This one, it feels like the game is screaming at me to give Shelton Benjamin a singles run, but I'll say no more than that. Sting only considered a star. He's somebody who could almost have permanent major star status, but because he's not been used that much, in fact I think his win-loss record's pretty out, 4 wins, 4 losses, but that's what he's here to do. He's only had one match on Impact, that was against Jimmy Jacobs, but as the veteran on the roster, as the legendary figure that he is, when we have the chance for him to put over somebody like Jeff Hardy, when we want the New Age to be put over when they first came in, he's not been pinned in a lot of those matches, to be fair, but as part of being that veteran, a huge part of his character is that we want him to put people over. Tyler Black, one of them, on the ascent, without question. 2012, if there's anybody who I'd say this is their year, I feel like 2012 is going to be the year of Tyler Black, and it's not going to be long on screen before you see that. I've sang the praises of him, of Claudio Castagnoli, and of Chris Hero, and I feel like they are 3 men who exemplify what this whole save's been about. Young, hungry, aggressive, a wrestling style that you might not be seeing everywhere on mainstream television at this time, and this is what makes us different to WWE at this moment. We've got so many fantastic wrestlers, but those 3 and a few others, Austin Aries, the Wolves, I just feel like they bring such an interesting, unique style. They all have their own signature things. Obviously Claudio Castagnoli with the uppercuts, Chris Hero with the elbows. I think Tyler Black had just some of the most explosive offense Austin Aries was very, very innovative. I think the Wolves as a tag team, and I mean, it's a fantastic roster looking at our major stars. AJ Styles, Mr. TNA, an interesting dynamic with him, I think, now being on that level footing. He always had that credit in the bank. He was the guy who'd been there since day one. Well, we've all been here since day one now, AJ, so you're going to have to fight even harder or just as hard to maintain that position. Bryan Danielson, for me, with Kurt Angle currently out of action, he's the guy who I see as filling that role, and he's done it sublimely. 90 rating matches, absolutely guaranteed, and somebody who can go out there week in and week out. He's not somebody who we're looking to give weeks off. He's somebody we want in the ring every single chance we get. CM Punk, the top guy in the company, in terms of his popularity certainly, and in terms of his booking. What more can you say? He's led the New Age of Honor, but now he's got what he wanted. TNA is no more. Impact Wrestling begins with him at the top of the ladder as the Impact World Champion. Desmond Wolfe, delighted to see him at major star level as well. That's probably more to do with his recent booking, probably the last few months has got him up there. He's a guy who has a little bit of a, I don't know what the word is, but he didn't get where everybody felt he should have done in his career in reality. Bryan Danielson himself has spoke about how it's just the look. I think he said even just Wolf being honest about his injuries to WWE, that is the difference between Bryan becoming the star he did and Wolf retiring and never getting to have a match in WWE. That's not to say he didn't have a very memorable and legendary career, but just that he's not, for example, still in the ring like Bryan is today. Jeff Hardy, another one who we've currently got off screen, as is Kurt Angle, but people who are under contract and they're not going anywhere. It's just about finding the role for them when they're ready to come back, and they're again, people who are a little bit different to the rest of the roster. We've got these, it's almost a who's who of independent wrestlers from this time. So to have two established ex-WWE guys, that almost makes them the unique part of the roster. In TNA in real life, they were tarred with a brush of anybody who's been in WWE comes in and gets a spot. Well, this is kind of the opposite. We've got a few people who used to work in WWE, and the question isn't whether these TNA guys can reach the level of these mythical WWE superstars. It's whether the WWE superstars can continue to hang with this new generation of wrestler. Now, I've gone through everybody there. It's a very, very long discussion, and really, I just wanted to show you what I have in my mind. I'm sure some people will agree on some people and disagree on others, and that's completely fine. Who knows what can happen? It's all about what the game throws up as much as anything else, and that's what I'm really interested to see. Impact Wrestling, it isn't a revolution, it isn't us changing everything, it's just a slight change, a new focus, and sometimes just that fresh start can give you it certainly give me a little bit more inspiration. We were sort of on the rails with that ROH TNA storyline. I knew where it was going from day one, and we just kind of had to fill in the gaps. Now it's a new start, a new outlook, and I'm delighted to book Impact Wrestling going forward. For me, one of the best rosters that we've ever seen assembled. We're making money with the second best company in the world, but we want to get from medium to big. We want to get that prestige up to 100. We want to build that momentum, and we can do that with the build to Impact Wrestling Genesis. Thank you for watching this video. I know it's going to be pretty long, and maybe people aren't going to be that interested in my thoughts on individual people. For those who have watched, thank you, and I hope you found that interesting. I cannot wait for you to see what is coming next, and hopefully you'll be looking forward to joining me for that. I'll see you next time.